Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Arun Ragas. I am the director of the Wasserman Center for Career Development at the School of Professional Studies. I'm really excited to kick off today's Behind the Title session. Our team here has been hosting programs to virtually connect you with industry professionals across different industries. And today we have a very special guest who works in the tech space, who we'll introduce in a second. Today, our theme is focused on the title of a systems analyst. And the goal of this program and series is for you to better understand this title's job duties and responsibilities, ways to be successful in this title, and also hear from the speaker their career journey and how they got to be in this title. So we will hear from Jeremy for about 20-ish minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for Q&A with him at the end. But if you have reactions or questions throughout the session, definitely feel free to engage in the chat box. You can type in questions there. You can also engage with one another in there. And for the Q&A portion, we'll invite you to type in questions in the chat box, or I'll ask you to unmute yourself so you'll have the opportunity to introduce yourself and ask the question yourself. We also have a very simple session worksheet that you can use to take notes during or after the session, and we'll go ahead and put the link to that in the chat box. And what you can do is just make a copy of it and save it to your drive so you can type your own notes into it directly. Some best practices to keep in mind while we're in this space: if you could just keep your mics on mute when you're not speaking, that would be helpful to drown out any background noise. And to ask questions that are of general interest and help to the group, you maybe want to avoid questions that are too specific to your personal situation, since we are in a group setting. Also be mindful of how much time and space you're taking compared to other students in the room. We want to give others a chance to ask questions as well. And when engaging here in the space, just encourage you all to come from a place of seeking insight, information, and advice, and to also be respectful of the speaker's time. We ask that you stay present, again, hopefully with your cameras on, so Jeremy doesn't feel like he's talking to an empty room. And to not be shy, be confident, take advantage of the opportunity. This is all just a conversation. And also do want to say, we want to make sure that the space is safe and productive. So we don't anticipate any disruptions or distractions, but if so, you may be asked to leave the room. Hopefully we won't have to do that. And if we run into any tech issues or hiccups, thank you in advance for being flexible and understanding. And with that, I will turn it over to our guest speaker for today, Jeremy Perez. And let me just go ahead and load up his presentation.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Jeremy. This is the first time I've had a presentation in a long time. So I'm hoping this is going to be pretty casual. So I am a systems analyst currently at the New York Times. So our agenda for today is going to be, go ahead and hit the next slide, Edwin. Will be a little bit about myself, and then my experience as a systems analyst and what I think it entails, and then my actual experience in my current roles, and some tips and tricks. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So I'm from Seattle. I was born and raised there. I went to the University of Washington with a math and graduated with a math degree. I have a database development certificate through Seattle College, and I'm currently in Queens, New York, in Astoria specifically. And I do have a joke. So my joke is, it's really bad, but I'm gonna say it anyways. My joke is, where do dads store their jokes? If anybody wants to type it or say it out loud, that's totally fine. All right. Exactly, Daniel. Nice. All right, we can go to the next slide.
Can you actually say it for folks who might
in
be
a database
after? So wait, set it up, say the joke.
Okay, so where do dads store their jokes? They store them in a database. I always like to start stand-ups that way with a joke, or my team, what we like to do is if you're late, you have to say a joke or do something awkward. So that will, that'll always get somebody's attention. Anyways, so what does being a systems analyst entail? So in my opinion, the most important characteristics of a system analyst is system agnostic. So what that means is regardless of what the system is, these are things that a systems analyst does and should know how to do. So they should be able to create system and functional documentation. They should be able to do business requirements gathering, and they should also be able to do solutions design and prototyping. Prototyping always sounds very difficult, but you can do a very raw prototype where it's literally just written on a piece of paper in pencil, and that's considered a prototype as well. UAT stands for user acceptance testing. It's kind of just guiding a user through a new system or through using a new feature. And then you have to have a lot of cross-functional teamwork experience. You have to be able to troubleshoot. Much of the work that I've done has incorporated some type of end user support. Also, knowing and understanding what agile and waterfall and other methodologies are. And then lean practices, this I have less experience in, but I know that it's in a lot of the applications and resumes and different things that I've seen. So to the software aspect, a lot of this that I've written down is based off of what I've seen in job applications and what I've seen in a lot of resumes. So I personally have a lot of experience in SQL, in APIs, and large ERP systems. Linux I've seen in a lot of, so I recently, just to backtrack a little bit, I was at Starbucks for about 5 years as a systems analyst, and I've been at the New York Times as a systems analyst for about 5 months. So I'm relatively new to kind of applying to different roles. And so I've seen a lot of Linux. ETL stands for extract, transfer, and load. So think of a data warehouse. I don't have very much experience in a data warehouse. Usually I use a lot of APIs because I support a lot of front-end development. And then ERP stands for, I should know this, enterprise. It's enterprise resource planning. So ERP, think of software everybody's using an ERP. Think of software like Oracle, anything for procurement, anything for expenses, anything for finance. These are all considered ERPs. So examples are like Oracle, Workday, SAP. Yeah, and then networking protocols, I don't have as much experience but I have seen it in a lot, especially Amazon. I think networking protocols are more for, let's say, security. And where can this lead? So I've spoken to quite a few people. A lot of them become managers of engineers, managers of analysts. You can also go in, I've spoken to a few people that have gone into computer science and engineering, and also people who left computer science and engineering to become a systems analyst. And then I think a systems analyst is a good place where you can transfer to being a different kind of analyst. There are things like being a data analyst, a business analyst, or a business systems analyst, if you want to work more with business partners. So we can go and go to the next slide. So if you click the arrow,
Give me a second. I will get there. Hold on.
You can probably refresh and then go back to the beginning, or like on that bar. Yep. You can probably click on that bar to go to the next. Oh, looks like it's going back. Weird.
Sorry, there's a live transcription that's in the way of the, can I use a
I
space
see.
bar or something?
So you can probably just double click into my experience if you double click that.
Ah, okay.
Perfect. So as far as my experience, I interned at the Boeing company as a design engineering intern. It wasn't quite for me. And so I went from in college from mechanical engineering to having a maths degree. And then I started my career after college at Zulily, where I was in accounts payable, and then to ZipWhip. Zulily is a online retail company that's more for merchandise. And specifically, their goal was to work for mom is what their slogan was kind of like. ZipWhip was a cloud-based texting company where I was working under the chief technology officer. And so he kind of took on finance, and that's kind of where I transitioned into more of a technical role. It was a startup, so a lot of the information that I needed for financial reports, for commissions and different things were done through grabbing all the information through an API or creating SQL queries. And then that's how I transitioned to Starbucks. And then from Starbucks, I worked there for about 5 years on their global retail engineering and delivery team. And if you click into the Starbucks Coffee Company, so within this team, I worked mostly on the front end or with front end developers. We had a web app, an iPod, and an iPad app. We worked mostly in inventory. So think of if you're at a store, everything that gets delivered to Starbucks is either frozen or fresh. If it came in frozen, we had an app that would tell the baristas, you need to defrost this so that in enough time you'll have enough inventory. So basically, you get 10 cookies in the morning. You have 5 from yesterday that are already defrosted. Our app would actually tell you when you needed to defrost these items so that it's ready when we think that you'll run out of 5 in the middle of the day. And if it takes 3 hours to defrost the cookie, we'll tell you, this is your 3-hour mark to pull the cookies out of the freezer so that it's ready by 5 p.m. when we think you're going to run out of the 5 cookies that are already defrosted from yesterday. And so that's one of our iPod apps. And within the engineering team or the technology team that I worked in, we worked in agile methodology. I worked on a Scrum team. And so in a Scrum team, or I guess within agile, there are ceremonies that happen called sprint planning, daily stand-up, iteration review, and retrospective. These are all formal ceremonies within agile. A Scrum is usually we work in Scrum teams, and a Scrum team is basically just a smaller group of developers, analysts, and maybe a business person. And we work in sprints. So these sprints are about 1 to 4 weeks. And at the beginning of those 4 weeks in the sprint planning, we determine what work we can commit to and what work we think that we can finish in these 1 to 4 weeks. And then I would support QA whenever they needed it. QA stands for quality assurance. So basically, whenever we want to deploy anything to a new feature or anything like that to a new, or if we want to deploy a new feature, we have to test it in our lower environments. So it has to go through specific testing before we say it's ready to be given to the customer. And so QA is basically making sure that it is ready at every stage.
Jeremy, can I jump in and ask a question?
Yeah.
So, working on, let's say, the feature that you mentioned with Starbucks, the app that reminds you like, oh, it's time to take it out. Like, does that idea come from like you and your team? of like, hey, let's create this feature? Or I guess what's the relationship between like the things that you work on? Is that sourced from you and your team's recommendations, or someone comes to you and says, hey, this is what we need, go ahead and work on it?
Okay, so that's a
I
very
guess
good
the
question.
question is how much I guess creativity lives in that space.
Yeah. So as a systems analyst, we're kind of in the middle between the business partners and the engineers. So at the very beginning, the business partners say, I want this thing. They'll work with our product manager to see how much effort, how much of, or how needed is this item. And then if they determine it's very necessary, we'll have one of these agile ceremonies, or not necessarily an agile ceremony, but we'll have a meeting with the developer, the business, and systems analysts. Where we'll be in the room, we'll say the business really wants this. How much of an effort is this? And then basically everyone kind of points, and anything that has the highest amount of points will be considered work that needs to be done immediately. Let's say the business says, this is going to give us a really high value. And engineering team says, this is going to give us, or this is the least work and highest value. That would be what's considered as the most, what we would focus on. If something is considered high value and high amount of work, it depends on whether the value outweighs the amount of work. As a systems analyst, we do get to see all of those features first, and we do get to test out whether or not we see a alternative solution. So before we say, yes, we'll work on this, or before we say, we think this is necessary, or the business says that we think this is necessary, usually they'll ask a systems analyst, hey, can this already be done? Or is there something quick that doesn't need engineering work? Because engineering is very expensive. The business partners will always try to first figure out a way to not create work for engineers. And so that's where the systems analyst comes in and says, hey, let me try to see if our system can do something different without having engineers working on it. So there's a little bit of, I'd say, flexibility that you get to, as a systems analyst, you kind of get to see what our system is capable of doing. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Cool. So I think yeah, there we go. So within the New York Times, currently I'm in the partner revenue technology team. Think about ads and like Gucci or anything like that you see on the physical newspaper, and ads whenever you go into the New York Times website. So my team is the team that supports the customer, as in the person who wants to put the ad out there. We support the way a customer wants to enter an ad. But with these larger companies like Gucci, and they want full spreads, or they want different size ads, that's also something that's supported by our team. So think of from a customer saying, I want to get this ad, all the way to it being published into the newspaper or on the website and where. Our team is kind of right in the middle of that. There's also quite a few different softwares that are involved, but we're kind of like right in the middle of creating that actual item on the page. And so this position that I'm in currently is mostly web-based. Actually, it's only web-based. So that just means it's online. You have to be on a computer for it. And currently my team is transitioning from one ERP, enterprise resource planning software, to another. So what that means is that we're using one system to create our ads, but we've just transitioned to a new system. And so a lot of the work that I'm currently doing is, it says determining a new way of working basically means in the old system, this is how we booked ads. So the determining of a new way of working is basically, is there an easier way to book ads? Do customers need to fill out all of this information? Is some of this information kind of inferred where we can just automatically set it up for them when they pick a specific type of ad, right? And so right now we don't have any super users. So a super user is essentially, super user or SME is someone who knows the system in and out. It's a new system to all of the business partners. It's a new system to us as systems analysts and to the developers. So I think I came into this team at a really good time because it's not that nobody knows what's going on. It's that everybody is free to make a mistake, or everybody is free to just go into our lower environments and just play around with everything. And so I guess that how it's been done versus how it should be done is the same thing as determining a new way of working. So I'm going to skip that. And then basically determining business need and system capabilities. That's another way of like saying, in the old system, we did this. Was that actually necessary? In the old system, we had all of these reports. Were all those necessary? Or is there something that I can create that can be used by multiple teams for multiple purposes? And then I do a bit of QA. We don't have a QA team. Oh, I think I skipped over managed service. So managed service essentially means that I no longer work with in-house developers. Our actual software is being managed by another company. So we're actually using something out of the box. And so we don't have as much engineering work, and because we create requests to an offshore team who actually does most of the development and requests that we want. And so I do a bit of QA. We don't have a QA team on my current team because there isn't that much development. So all of us have just been doing our own QA. And then all I have left is tips and tricks. So when I was applying, I had job-specific resumes. So essentially, I would look at if you're applying and you see a role that you want, I would look at that role and all of its descriptions and basically use a lot of the keywords that you see on the descriptions of the roles. This helps a lot because the first person that actually sees your resume isn't the hiring manager. It's usually what are they called? It's usually the person that screens your interview, which is probably a non-technical person, and probably someone from recruitment who was given that same description and was given a little bit extra information from the manager and saying, this is what I want to see in a resume, please filter these for me. And then it's actually the recruiter who filters the resumes and say, hey, I think these are great based off of what you want. So the easier you make it for the recruiter to see your resume or to think that it fits, the faster you'll get to the actual hiring manager for an interview. And definitely research before applying.
Sorry, I'm going to jump in, Jeremy, just on that on the resume piece. When you say to make it easier for the recruiter to see, can you talk a little bit more about like how you think recruiters are reading resumes in terms of like the order of things? Like if there are like software like languages and skills, like does that go at the top? Like what's the ideal format, I guess, of like how the information should be presented?
Yeah. I would say, I'm not quite sure how recruiters go through resumes.
Or maybe just how you did it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically I would look at the descriptions and different things that they're looking for um, in that role. And I would basically look at my resume and say, they are using a lot of words like troubleshoot. So I'm also going to use troubleshoot in my resume as a word instead of saying, I obviously don't fake your resume, but there are a lot of syllables that you can switch around to use the same syllables that they're using in their description, right? So if they say they need somebody with a lot of ERP experience, I would say, I have experience using the Oracle ERP. By adding that ERP in there, it's easier for that person to match. Because let's say it's a non-technical recruiter who says, actually, I don't know what ERP stands for, so I'm just going to look for that. I don't know that Oracle is an ERP, right? And a lot of this actual, like, I think that before the recruiter even sees it, they get so many resumes in a day, in a week, right? There has to be some type of way that systematically that they comb through all of these and see the ones that bubble up to the top, right? And that's why I think word search is probably the easiest. A lot of the times when I was applying, I had an accounting background, and a lot of the calls that I did get back were a lot of accounting roles. Even though most of my experience the past 5 years is systems and technology, it always had to do with something related to system or technology to my accounting roles. And so I can tell that I was like, okay, well, I'm getting a lot of interviews and callbacks from accounting specific systems, even though my last experience was inventory and had nothing to do with accounting. Somehow it's getting filtered through as an accounting system role, right? Or somehow I'm getting filtered into the accounting systems roles. And then the next thing is missions and values do matter. All of my interviews, they have talked about their missions and values. I know that I have friends that work at Amazon, and I've gone through the Amazon interview cycle a few times. A lot of their questions don't specifically say you have to say these 14. So Amazon has 14 principles. Basically, in every question, they're not going to tell you to recite any of the principles, but their questions are leading to those 14 principles. And so you want to be able to tie your answers into those principles, into those missions and values, because it is really important to some people. And then know your transferable skills. I think that this job market is definitely a job seekers market. And they know that a lot of people are transitioning or moving to different roles and different fields. And transferable skills are just as important. And that's why I also think the system agnostic skills that we talked about in the beginning are the most important, because you may not have experience in the specific software, but that's something that someone can teach you. And then as far as interviewing, prepare for a technical interview. At the New York Times, I didn't have a technical interview for this specific role, but at Amazon I did. I had 2 interviews at Amazon. One I did, one I didn't. So it honestly depends on what kind of systems analyst role it is. A systems analyst role can go from technical to non-technical, and variations in between. And then
Can you
I don't
share a
know.
little bit more context? What's a typical technical interview?
Okay. So a typical technical interview for a systems analyst is basically, they go from easiest to hardest depending on how much time you have. They'll say, Sometimes it will be in Excel if you're dealing with a lot of accounting rules. Mine were mostly in SQL. They'll say, I have two tables. I want to join them. How are you going to join them? How do you make sure that each of the, or how do you make sure your the join table that you have only has distinct values? And they'll also ask questions of like, what's the most complicated function that you've used, or what's the most complicated like expression that you've used in SQL. Sorry, these are all very specific to SQL. That's what I mostly work in. Yeah. And then as far as doing the soft interview, and I don't know if you guys have heard of the STAR method. I think it stands for situation, task, action, and result. Really focus on the action and the result, but really set yourself up in the situation and task. I understand why it feels like situation and task are the same things, but they're I can see how they're different. And then know your and then an interview is a two-way street. This is how I keep myself from being too nervous in an interview. I don't see it as I'm trying to acquiesce to this person. I see it as, if you want me on your team, I also want to be on the team. And if it's a very dry conversation, if I'm feeling like I will never make this manager happy, it's not a good interview, right? And I think that like a manager who actually wants you should show that they want to as an employee, right? And so the things that you have to be asking yourself is, will I be comfortable working under this manager for years? Is this a role that's going to take me to where I want to be? And really ask those questions. And then I say treat LinkedIn differently. I think my LinkedIn is attached to that. But I do have a question from, is it Leica, right?
Yes, yeah, that's for me.
Perfect. How do you gauge how much time to spend on situation and tasks in the STAR method? I would say make sure they understand what the actual problem is. And I'd say don't spend any more time on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I feel like sometimes like when I'm asked a question and I want to use the STAR method, I want to explain exactly what the situation was in regards to where I was working and what the situation was like. But I feel like I waste a lot of time on that, and then I can't get to the action, and then I start talking too fast and you forget the whole purpose of the statement.
I definitely think you have to keep it at a high level. They're not going to need to know the nitty and gritty of how you actually figured out the issue or different things like that. Just say, this is what happened. This is what I was told to do. And this is how I actually fixed it, and then go into that.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
A trick to that too that we've shared with folks is to kind of frame it is to, when you start the response, start actually with the result. So like, yeah, I've got an example of when I, fixed the system of XYZ. Back when I was working at Starbucks, right? And then that way even if like you sort of ramble on, at least you started with like what the result was. So they've got that in their mind as you're taking them through the answer. There are some questions that are coming in, Jeremy. I don't know if you want to finish your thought on this slide, and then maybe we can transition it to just Q&A from the questions that are coming in.
Yeah, okay. So let's just go ahead and click on our on the LinkedIn link. What I see a lot is so I'm not a manager or anything like that, but I am pretty nosy. And whenever I have to interview someone I definitely look at their LinkedIn and I definitely look at everything else because it's just somebody that I'm going to be working with. And what I see a lot is a lot of people put nothing or the same exact stuff that they put on their resume on their LinkedIn. And so the about me, I wouldn't look at too much because I haven't fixed that in a while. But what I would look at is if you look at my Starbucks experience, and then if you click on see more for that systems analyst 2, see more on the right-hand side with a ... see more, you see that I've changed it into my projects at the very top because they want to see, from my understanding, people want to see what you've accomplished in your role, and then your responsibilities fall last because these responsibilities are something that probably can be taught to somebody else, right? But your projects are really specific to what you've done. And I got most of my interviews from LinkedIn because I think that I applied with LinkedIn and I entered my resume, but because I had all of this extra information in my LinkedIn, I think that if there is some type of automated filtering, here's the way that I've added so much more information about what my roles are and what I can do, right? Okay, and so questions. I see one from Shirley. What types of SQL are you familiar with? If you're familiar with one but not another, how do you navigate that in a technical interview? Got it. So I'm
right before you go into that, is the because if your slides are done, I can stop the share.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So let me stop my share here, and that way we can all see each other.
Yeah. So the type of SQL that I'm familiar with, I've done NoSQL, and I've done just SQL Server and what is that other thing called? I've done different types of SQL. Most of the questions that they're going to ask you are SQL. What is that specific type? It's the most used, essentially.
Yeah, I think that the reason I'm asking is because there's I've used Oracle SQL as well as MySQL, and I'm more familiar with one than the other. And sometimes the syntaxes are completely different. And so if they're not familiar with what you're familiar with, then how do you go about navigating and explaining to them that, or will they ask you for the exact syntax?
I personally have the most experience in MySQL. And usually they'll say, how would you do this in SQL? And if they ask for a specific way, if they say MySQL, try to stick to the syntax as closely as you can. But a lot of SQL is the same. Say, I would start with this select by, then I would filter with this, then I would group with this. So that's a way that you can answer the interview without having to go too deep into this is exactly what I'm going to type, right? Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
You did, thank you.
And you can always start with, I use MySQL mostly, but I think, and a great way to spin that is say, I use MySQL mostly, but I think all SQL is pretty much the same, where I start with a select statement, and this is what I'm selecting, and then I start with a group by, this is what I'm joining. These are the two tables I joined. This is how I would join them, right? And that is a way that you can kind of get away with that.
Shirley, do you want to go in and just ask your other question too?
Yeah, my other question was if you have any advice on explaining technical processes or terms or situations in a non-technical way to someone who is not in a technical role.
Yeah, I feel like I'm on an interview. I would say stick with like the system agnostic idea. Just say in Oracle, you have to specifically go to these different widgets or whatever, right? I would say in Oracle, this is what the person is trying to do, or this is their goal. This is how they get to it usually. You may feel like you're speaking more broadly, but you can always say, I hope that answers your question, unless you want me to go into specifics on how in Oracle, how to configure specific things or different things like that. How big is your
Thank you.
team at that
Daniel, our
department?
friend from the database. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question. Otherwise,
Sure.
go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, so Jeremy, I know you already got it
Mhm.
reading it. But basically I'm curious. I recently started working as a systems analyst, first time as a systems analyst to begin with.
Mhm.
And I'm in a peculiar situation where I joined a small team, and that's sort of the appeal for me as well, because there's a lot to learn. And because the team is small, right, the expectation is that you are kind of wearing all, like kind of expected with as a systems analyst in general, you're wearing many hats, but in this case, we'd be wearing like all the hats. And then both my teammates, announced their either resignation or they got an external offer. So now I'm inheriting like all this, and I'm realizing that the full stack notion really, trickles down like vertically a lot and not just horizontally. So trying to get a bit more on that, I guess, if it helps more on the management side, if that's easier to sort of explain, because, this is sort of something that my manager and I are now having to navigate, and, whether we should continue how we're doing things, right? We should delegate outwards, to like what you said, like managed services, or kind of how to continue our services to our stakeholders without kind of dropping the ball.
Yeah. So at Starbucks, I was at a team of 7, all 7 of us. So our team was called Global Retail Engineering and Delivery. All 7 of us had our own software that we had to work in, but we also had a 24/7 support on-call rotation. So for a week. So for me, someone who I was working more on the inventory and the mobile order and pay space. And I worked with more front-end developers. One of our analysts worked with back-end developers and worked on creating APIs. So essentially, if I was on call and an API went down and I was the person on call, I had less knowledge of this API and how the API worked, right? Sometimes it would be an API that I've never used, on the inventory side, but it's used on like the accounting side, and I had to kind of figure that out. So that's kind of why I moved to a smaller group as well. Honestly, with that group of 7, all of us, I think that's where you have to be kind of honest with your business partners and kind of honest with your other team members. I would always say, hey, I have no clue what's going on in this revenue accounting space. Can I sit with you for an hour? Or to the business teams that I'm talking to that I'm trying to support, say, I don't usually work on this, but I'm totally here to help you figure it out and help support you. What would that person usually do? Or do you know certain situations in like that this person did something else, right? And my manager was very good about giving us the time to kind of play with the system. And my manager is really good now at the New York Times. I'm in a team of 3, and all of us, like somebody's working on digital ads, somebody's working on the accounting software portion, and I'm working on the print ad portion. So it's kind of like the same thing still, but my manager is giving us the time and says, I know that like you guys all don't have full plates, but that's the point. So you guys can kind of all learn these different things, and to definitely speak up if you think that you need more people and say this work isn't difficult, or this work isn't, or this is work that we as systems analysts should be doing, but we need more support. And then kind of really lead your manager, because you're the one that's kind of in the weeds. Lead your manager on what you want this team to be, right? Like say, I really think we should outsource this because this is really easy work. This is something that can be done by like a support team overseas or things like that. And I'd like to focus more on like the bigger picture or more on management. And I think my next step in my role is to manage a team. And I've had experience managing a team that you outsource. for like, let's say tier one support. Tier one support is basically like when someone calls, right, and say, I have a system issue. It's more of the, have you turned it on and off? What are you trying to do, right? And that a lot of that stuff is like things that is repeatable. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. That tapped into many things. Appreciate that.
So I think I've taken more than the.
Any
45
question? Any
minutes.
other
So
questions?
sorry about that.
I mean, I can throw a few. You know, in your role, you probably deal with situations where like what you were working on didn't work, or you know, it didn't go according to plan. So how do you and your team, you know, face or deal with failure, and how do you approach that?
Yeah, for sure. I think within even this role now, like one of the things that I actually accidentally do, we have lower environments. We call it the dev environment, which is the most, the dev environment is where people deploy things that they want to test different things. And like, it's very like, I think it's miscombobulated. And then test environment is the next level where we think this feature works. We're going to put it in our test environment to see it's the closest thing to our production environment, which is what the customers are using. And we'll see how it works with our different apps and our different things. And then there's the production environment. So I was testing and validating in our test environment. I was supposed to be, but I did it in prod. So I accidentally created orders for ads, deleted ads, and different things like that. And I didn't realize. So the next day, I remember this specifically because I was messing with a Fendi ad. And I was like, ooh. And so what I did was I tried to correct it as soon as somebody told me in the marketing team, and they're like, one of my ads didn't go through and it looks like it's canceled, so I don't know what's going on. And I was like, oh, and they're like, I think I see your name on it, because I would name it Jeremy Test. And I was like, oh, that is, that's weird. I didn't do that. And so I tried to fix it as soon as I could. And I didn't tell my manager, which obviously is the wrong thing to do. Obviously fix it. I told my manager brought it up and he goes, why didn't you tell me? And I was like, oh, sorry. And he goes, well, I could have helped you. And he goes, you shouldn't have fixed it. You should have let them fix it because they should know how to do it, because it's new, right? People should know how to fix mistakes. And they're like, it sucks that you did it, but like if they had done it, they should know. If they had done it, they should know how to fix it. And you've kind of robbed them the opportunity of fixing it. And so, so I'd say always look for a team that is, that allows you to make mistakes and it doesn't make you feel bad about it, right? And always let your manager know, because they'll figure out at some point.
Jeremy, on sticking with like the manager piece, do you manage people currently, or have you? Because I also imagine that folks who go into this role, you know, it's either you are like an individual contributor, or like, right, like you're in the weeds, so to speak, but
Yeah.
then eventually folks who are in this role end up, you know, the next level is you're the manager or supervisor of a team. Can you talk a little bit about like what you know, if you have this experience yourself, what makes someone successful when they do sort of graduate right to that level of having to manage people on top of doing the very technical stuff? Because I think that's something that we see is folks are really good at what their job, right, is their native role. And then this idea of, okay, with a promotion comes supervision of people, and maybe not everyone is the best at doing that. So how have you seen people be really successful when that part of their career has to happen?
Yeah. So at Starbucks, we had outsourced our tier one production support. So basically the idea of like one of our baristas, say the app isn't working. What's wrong with the app? Have you tried turning it off? Doing that stuff. So we outsourced that, and it was up to me to manage that team of, I think it was 7 or 10. And they were in India. So I would have daily meetings in the morning and say, this is open to everyone. This is where we're just going to answer your questions. and really be transparent and say like this, like you can, so when I had those meetings, you can kind of tell when like the understanding isn't as clear, right? And so really digging into like, well, why did you do that without having an ego at all, right? Because when you manage a team, your management is only as good as your team, is what I believe. And so I always wanted to give them the opportunity to fix their own mistakes and to make mistakes. Because I mean, you want your team to be successful, but you also want a team. You don't want everybody to put in their notice, right? As long as you know what's going on, I think as a manager, I think that, and the people that you manage are always comfortable to go up to you and say, this is what I did, just prepare for this, whatever. I think really helps in a team. Also, I think saying like, or being approachable in the terms of like, in the terms of being able to change, like, what am I trying to say? I think if you want to start managing people, you have to kind of start small. And so within your team, you can say, hey, I want to take on this process. And so you kind of start with processes first and managing a process. And then like, if you're able to manage a process, people use those processes and say, I think I can move up to managing people. Or a lot of people use this process that I've like created. It's like small things that you can show to show that you can manage literally anything, right? Because these are transferable skills.
Great.
I'm still kind of in that process now. I'm a mid to senior level analyst. I don't think I want to manage people. But I know that that's probably either going to be, so where I'm going is either going to be in management of people or in kind of technical product management or something like that.
Great. So we're nearing the time that we've allotted, but want to give folks a last chance to ask a question before we head out. We have a survey link that we've plugged into the chat box. If you could fill that out, it's a very brief survey just to give us some feedback on today. But Jeremy, any final thoughts before we close?
So is everyone in the industry or graduating or currently working as a systems analyst?
So I'm currently working full-time as well as a full-time student under the Management Systems program at SPS. So I'm trying to pivot into something that's data analytics or system analytics. No professional experience though.
I think we've got a mix. I know Daniel mentioned he's working as a systems analyst already. Nicholas, I think you're about to say something.
Yeah, I'm also studying under management info systems at SPS, and I don't have any experience in the industry either, but I'm looking to get into it. I was a smart home technician, and now I'm trying to pivot into like commercial IT world and what that has in store for me.
Well, good luck. I think it's a great time to pivot or to kind of go further within your career as like making a left turn or yeah.
Cool. Jeremy, we're going to put you on the spot. How can people keep in touch with you, follow up? You showed us your LinkedIn, so hopefully people can connect with you that way.
Yeah. I can always answer questions on LinkedIn. You can definitely connect with me that way. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again, Jeremy, for joining us today and giving us a whole insight into your world as a systems analyst. I want to thank everyone who's here for spending your time with us. Again, the survey is in the link. It'd be really helpful if you could fill that out for us. We did record today's session, so we're going to make sure that this recording link goes out to you and then those who RSVP'd as well. But we have the rest of this series for the month behind the title. So check out the next one and other upcoming ones, which you can find on Handshake. So with that, we're gonna stop the recording here and have a good day, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.